I'm on a journey to build the perfect deck, and I don't necessarily mean the best possible deck in the format or a 100% win rate type of perfection. I just want to take a solid deck that I love and focus on perfecting it in the moment, for the current online meta or perhaps a specific tournament event. Today I'll take a look at the Mufasa deck from my last video and walk through a ton of testing and changes I've done to make it the best it can be. One thing I love about Lorcana, even within its first two sets, is its smart design and choices in cards that really allows for small tweaks and developments that add up to big improvements. Let's talk about deck development in light of performance and changes in the meta. I think we can all agree that it's likely one of these two factors that inspire someone to change their deck. Either the deck's performance is underwhelming, or the strategic landscape changes and suddenly your deck isn't as effective against new popular lists. In response to either, there's two ways to solve the problem. Use a brand new, shinier deck, or adapt your list. As a channel that shows off new Lorcana decks, and whether intentional or not, essentially encourages net decking to keep up with the meta, I think it's time I spend a video talking about the other option, adapting your deck. Speaking from experience, this practice will make you a better player and deck builder, and can often be the most rewarding aspect of playing a card game like Lorcana. So today I'll be improving and aiming to perfect my Mufasa deck. If you saw my last video, I showed off the list and its impressive win rate, especially against Ruby Amethyst Control. But at this point, a fair amount of those games are a couple weeks old, and the meta doesn't just sit around that long. And although Control is still the top deck and very popular, there has been an influx of variety lately, specifically from Steel decks. Purple Steel and Blue Steel have joined in alongside Discard and Steel Song. These have been steadily rising up for a while digitally and are finally trickling into IRL events. If I'm determined to continue playing my Mufasa deck competitively, I'll need to improve it against the entire format, including these strong Steel decks. The goal is to improve my play against these new decks, while also retaining the decent matchup against Ruby Amethyst that I found previously. Let's look at some data. You can see now that after 40 plus digital games with this deck and a similar amount in print, I'm still doing pretty good, but I've taken a few losses that are beginning to show a trend. When looking at the matches up top, 3 losses are from Ruby Amethyst and 2 are from the mirror match. This is expected versus the best control deck and against a bit of randomness in the mirror, but the more important stat are the losses versus Steel decks. Amethyst Steel, Sapphire Steel, and Amber Steel. And although I'm undefeated against Emerald Steel, specifically the Discard deck, I know a lot of people were asking me for help in that matchup. So it may be a difficult one as well, and my sample size just hasn't reflected that yet. These trends of a struggle against Steel are reflected in my print matches as well, and it makes sense. The Mufasa deck is really a mid-game leaning aggro deck. Yes, it has its own identity, but the goal is to quest fast and always have pressure on board. So with Steel rising in popularity, I have to decide now. Do I jump over to a new deck, or try to improve and perfect my Mufasa list for this meta? I think you already know the answer. Let's walk through the steps I take when developing a deck. I like aiming for these 3 goals: consistency, meta resilience, and creative play. And as I walk through, if you find these tips and advice to be useful, make sure to drop a like on the video. It's always much appreciated. Alright, let's review my development of the deck, starting with the previous list from my previous video. The core of the deck will stay the same, except I think it's time to retire the Rockstar Stitch package. Here's a few reasons why. To start, it's become less necessary over time as a card draw engine, as Rapunzel plus Mother Gothel are great on their own, and I often find myself simply returning that combo to my hand with Hades rather than playing out the Rockstar Stitch. After all, he does drop in value if you run less 1 and 2 cost characters, which is certainly something I want to do in this deck. Mufasa and Rockstar Stitch really don't get along that well, as Mufasa wants much more valuable, and therefore costly, characters making up the majority of this list. Another reason why Stitch is less necessary is that my 2 primary openers don't need the support. Initially, I had the new dog Stitch into Shift Rockstar as a go-to opening tactic for the deck, but I've found that my 2 main openers are very solid and extremely consistent on their own. These being the Rapunzel combo and the Dock into a 5-drop on 4 combo, ideally Mufasa. Beforehand, as seen in most players' lists, Stitch was another early game priority alongside the Queen. I didn't run her before, but she's very, very common in this deck, so it's worth mentioning why I don't run these popular 1-cost openers. I've found more success with Rapunzel and Doc, and as I said, they're simply way more consistent. One reason for this is that their openers begin on turn 3 and 4 rather than 1. Gothel, of course, can be played on 2, but 3 works as well since Rapunzel isn't played until 4. But the point I'm trying to make here is that because you have 2 or 3 turns to draw before beginning those openers, you have a much higher chance of finding the pieces by the time you need them. Adding the queen in, for example, actually complicates your opening. It's good when you want to challenge in on turn 2 or 3 with the shift or sing a valuable song, but unless you're against a hyper aggro list, this deck doesn't want to trade early. Often you're looking to hold your board until you can dock into Mufasa on 4, or Rapunzel your previously played Gothel on 4. So until aggro decks become rampant again, I'll be leaving these turn 1 shift targets out of my Mufasa deck. In addition to my strong core characters, I've been really liking the addition of more evasive characters. First of all, they synergize beautifully with Mufasa, as they're sent out exerted when he's banished, so the evasive is a nice touch. But they're also particularly good against Ruby Amethyst, as they avoid Maui and Madame M. Fox, and often force out valuable action removal from Dragonfire or Be Prepared. Additionally, Goofy is a great follow-up to Surfer Mini if you find yourself in a reactive position. However, when I was first testing evasives, although they did wonders against bounce control, they continued to underperform against steel decks who can combo Tink, Smash, grab your swords, and so on to take them down. So I took out some of the evasives and began testing and considering Eudora. She's the 5-cost alternative to Goofy, used to survive the entire slew of steel damage while continuing to quest each turn. She can also survive the rush from Maui, similar to the evasive characters, which is fantastic as Maui is a great counter to Mufasa, often taking down whatever he spits out. So as a visual, now our opener with Doc looks like this: Mufasa as the prime target, with Goofy and Eudora as backups for different matchups, and with the Queen of Hearts as another option that grants us some draw power if it's still needed. Let's take a look at the full deck list with these changes applied. Another change you'll notice is that I've dropped Lantern. I found that Doc provides plenty of character ramp on his own, and even if I don't find him early, I don't feel set back enough to justify running the 2 to 3 lanterns. And even if Mufasa wasn't a factor, lanterns become a liability in the late game as a completely dead draw. However, I've still allowed myself 2 non-character card slots if they are valuable enough, and what do you know, I'm playing 2 copies of Be Prepared. These are just way too good to pass up as they are simply game-saving cards. Not just against these top decks in the meta that we've mentioned, but also against any aggro decks that are still around. I know some players have been liking Scar as a character version of Be Prepared, but to me he feels like a card that's great when you're already ahead, whereas Be Prepared is a total nope button that can get you back from a scary situation. Remember, Scar still relies on your opponent characters being exerted, and he only feels super effective if they have a lot of characters on board, meaning you might already be behind anyways. It's just a few too many hoops for me to jump through, and I prefer the Be Prepared. If you take a look at my overall list now, you'll see just how streamlined it is in terms of simplicity and consistency. I really value that highly when building a deck, and I think this Mufasa list is finally shaping up into something really solid. To understand the deck more and its changes, and to talk through my decisions with real examples, let's jump into some games. First, I'll show a game versus Ruby Amethyst Control, as I want to reiterate that Mufasa can truly disrupt that powerhouse of a deck. And although I've done a decent overhaul here to the list, we still have what it takes to take down Control. This match is also a great example of a standard game that shows a typical opening and straightforward decisions that you'll run into most often. After that, I'll jump into a couple matches against 2 different steel decks. And finally, to finish up, I'll talk more about this Mufasa deck and its future in the meta. Alright, let's dive in. In this game, I have a great first hand with 2 copies of Mufasa, plus my turn 2 through 4 characters. And after the toss back, I even find Gothel to pair with my Rapunzel. And now, since I have both Gothel and Simba, I could play it safe and wait to play Gothel alongside Rapunzel on turn 6, but I also would like to play my second Mufasa on turn 6 to have both out before a possible turn 7 Be Prepared from the opponent. So I go for the riskier decision and go ahead and play out Gothel on 2. This is pretty standard as you won't always have that choice to hold on to her or not. Just know that she'll be out there on the board for 2 turns, and is quite the juicy target for teeth and ambitions. As I play out this opening sequence, I'm inking stuff like Surfer Stitch and Eudora. I'm simply prioritizing keeping my stronger characters that I can play right away. But even if I didn't have Mufasa, Eudora is better off as ink against Ruby Amethyst compared to Goofy, whereas in a steel matchup, the opposite is often true. Here we get the Rapunzel heal off and draw 3, which feels fantastic. And now my plan is to play Mufasa out on both turn 5 and 6. Let's see how that plays out. At this point, they have a solid presence on board, which is typical. After all, I wouldn't be challenging in here or questing with anything other than Surfer Mini, so this particular board state is extremely common in the matchup, with Gothel and Rapunzel plus either Minnie or Doc staring at their Snake, Rabbit, and Maleficent. Alternatively, you'll often see them have Fox out instead of Maleficent, with Snake bounced back to hand. On turn 5, they commit Maui to the board to take out Gothel, which is fine with me. His main target will be Rapunzel on the following turn, but my goal here is to play Mufasa. With pressure from him either before or after the Be Prepared, I can really take over the game through aggression. This here is a turning point in the game, though, that's important to understand. My opponent is now at 9 ink and are poised to go to 13 next turn. If you know Ruby Amethyst, you know this is essentially a power spike in the game for them, especially with that many cards in hand. I have to pressure enough here so they must commit a board wipe with Be Prepared, otherwise they could quickly win the lore race with assistance from Goat or Spellbook. And this is where the typical aggro deck breaks down, but Mufasa helps push past their Be Prepared with continued pressure. Unfortunately here, they will be able to take down Mufasa first with Maui, and then still be able to quest and then Be Prepared the board, including whatever Mufasa spits out. The good news for me is that I do have that second Mufasa, otherwise it might be better for me to not quest with the first one so that they can't wipe him out right before the board wipe. They do take out Mufasa with Maui as expected, but they made a mistake by not questing with their other characters first. And Dragon comes out to stop Yzma from gaining 2 lore. Now granted, they may have wanted Yzma to take out whatever character was summoned there, saving the Be Prepared for a future turn, but the unknown element of Mufasa certainly worked in my favor this time. It seems like holding off on that wipe may have been their plan after all, as they then trade 2 for 1 into Maleficent, effectively making my Mufasa a 1 for 4 character trade. Seeing that response makes me think they don't have their Be Prepared in hand just yet, so that's pretty good news for me. They then follow up with Lady Tremaine, and I consider choosing Mufasa here. After all, something insane like a back-to-back dragon would be absolutely clip-worthy, but the smart choice here is definitely banishing Surfer Mini, so my second Mufasa can continue to pressure across multiple turns. Now back to me, and I have 7 ink to work with, so I play out Goofy plus Simba. This small addition of the bodyguard is such a good way to twist the knife more. Now, if they do happen to find their Be Prepared, Tremaine won't be able to clear out Mufasa before it's cast. And if they don't have Be Prepared like before, Mufasa continues to quest unless they have a rush character. They do have an answer though, with their Dragonfire and Rapunzel is sent out. That's pretty good for me as I still retain the 2 lore threat on board, and they use most of their ink for that Dragonfire. I continue to put on the pressure with Surfer Stitch and quest to 16. They finally play Be Prepared to wipe the board, and I throw out 2 characters to threaten lethal if they can't find any removal to stop me. And that is the game. Well played. I wanted to show that match as a sort of textbook example of the matchup. Of course, you won't always find multiple Mufasa, and he certainly won't always send out Maleficent Dragon, trust me. but I have found that this deck offers a lot of variance when it comes to successful sequences. Sometimes you'll need to draw off Queen of Hearts instead, or only find one Mufasa but loop him back with Hades for pressure. You get the idea. But this game was a good example of great main sequences to aim for in your own matches. Now that that's done, let's focus on the Steel matchups, since that's one of the major reasons for this video and the big updates to the deck. Remember, Steel has a lot of damage they will use to stop our aggro march, so cards like Eudora and Rapunzel will be more impactful in those matchups compared to some of the strong choices against Control, like Goofy and Minnie. One of the most requested matchups in my comments was against Emerald Steel Discard, as it's been giving Mufasa players trouble. Let's take a look at this game and I'll walk through my thoughts. The real goal here is to match their discard power with card draw power. Knowing this, I need to find my Rapunzel and Gothel above all else in this matchup. So even though I'd normally keep a 2-drop character like Simba, I toss him back and try to find that crucial duo, keeping only Mufasa. I do find Rapunzel, but no Gothel just yet, so I ink Dragon and pass. It's even more important than usual to ink high-cost characters in this matchup, as it's unlikely we'll get to turn 9, for example, with all those cards still in my hand. I play out Surfer Mini on 3, which is nice to have on board for early questing, although I would have preferred Doc to set up Mufasa or Gothel to set up Rapunzel. My opponent responds with Prince John, so now they have their ideal discard opener out and ready. Bucky to discard my cards when a Floodborn is played, and Prince John to fuel their own card draw whenever I have to discard. They go ahead and sing Sudden Chill to begin, and although I would think it might be better for them to keep Bucky safe, it's certainly possible they have a second Bucky ready to go, or maybe just don't have their Floodborn characters in hand to combo yet. After I discard, I go ahead and play out Rapunzel. I'm not afraid to use one of my 2 Rapunzels, even just to draw 1 card. I still have my other one and I need to draw in any way I can to get ahead. It's also nice having her on board just to begin questing, as an aggressive plan could definitely be my win condition. They ultimately used 2 Fire the Cannons to take down Surfer Mini, making me think they definitely wanted me to trade in for Bucky there, but didn't expect the Rapunzel. This is good news for me though. It signals that they don't have Giant Tink or Smash ready to go. But now it's turn 5, so I send out Mufasa and continue on with my plan. Notice I hold on to my Maui here instead of inking him. He's great against a lot of Floodborn units Steel likes to run, and he's also a great character for my Rapunzel to heal off of if I manage to get them both out. On my turn, I play Hades and take back Tremaine. Hades is fantastic against discard as he replaces himself in your hand, and I choose Tremaine now that I'm at 6 ink. I previously discarded her because I couldn't play or ink her. They take down Hades with Grab Your Sword and Quest with Flynn, and I'm quite happy to heal off some of that damage with Rapunzel now. However, I instead take the time to play out Tremaine here. If they remove Flynn, then I'm almost certainly going to win the lore race, but if they remove Prince John, they'll have a much harder time discarding my hand. Either way, they lose a lot of momentum here, and really their turn spent casting Grab Your Swords kinda went to waste. They play out Tink and banish Mufasa, who sends out Surfer Mini, and they have to take out Rapunzel with Flynn here, otherwise they risk me healing all 3 damage off her and drawing a ton of cards. I play out my other Tremaine to take out Flynn Rider, and now I'm only a couple turns away from the win. They play out Prince John and then Hypnotize, and then follow up with Tink, taking down Tremaine. But that 2 damage on Minnie backfires as I take my turn healing up with Rapunzel and playing out the Simba I just drew off her. Even without finding Mother Gothel, Rapunzel herself, and sometimes just the threat of her coming down for card draw, was a key part of this game and is a great place to focus if you're having trouble in the matchup. If you take some time to think about what your opponent could play next, plan for exactly what you need to play, ink and discard, and think at least a turn or two ahead, it really makes a huge difference playing against discard. Now, of course, that advice really goes for any deck you're piloting, but in particular, I think Amber does extra towards countering the steel discard deck. After all, they do rely on that steel damage to hold you down, and Rapunzel can take advantage of that to defend against the annoyance of the discard elements. Moving on now, let's get into the final match today against Amethyst Steel. This is one of the strongest decks in the format, and it's one that's been giving the Amber Ruby deck some trouble. So here's some tips on how to navigate the matchup. Since I already have 1 1/2 of my 2 opening options in my first hand, I decided to keep Be Prepared. Normally you wouldn't do this in pretty much any other Ruby deck, but this Mufasa list has plenty of inkable cards to find, and of course I don't want to see this Be Prepared pop up when Mufasa is banished later. Be Prepared is also really good into steel decks that want to set up strong units like Beast and Cinderella, and in this case additional Amethyst threats like Ursula or Elsa. Having 2 Mother Gothels in the opening hand against Steel can be pretty nice, as the first one can often bait out some early removal, like Let the Storm Rage On, Strength Like a Raging Fire, or Smash, and you can always play your second Gothel out on turn 6 alongside Rapunzel. In my case here, I don't have Rapunzel yet, but I'm still happy to play Gothel and go for Doc on 3 into Mufasa on 4. But as I'm planning that, I do draw into Rapunzel, so now I have a choice on which way to go on turn 4. Against many steel decks like Sapphire Steel, Steel Song, and green or purple mill decks, you may want to hold off on Rapunzel since they might end up playing a whole new world anyways, but I'm thinking this is a more mainline deck, potentially with Blue Fairy, so I need to keep up with that card draw, so I'll play out Rapunzel on turn 4 for the heal. I take some time to consider if I need Doc to be alive on the next turn so I can play a 6-cost character, but I definitely think I'll be playing Mufasa for 5 ink, so I go ahead and quest with Doc. Remember, this is essentially an aggro deck, so we quest ahead towards victory and pass. On the next turn, after they take out some of my board, you see me instinctively grab Eudora to ink, but this is the exact matchup she's used for. With that 9 willpower, she can often quest for 4 or more lore before being banished, so I want to keep her around in case I need to use her. I'm also really happy to quest Rapunzel on this turn. Even if they take her out, I can just bring her back with Hades and set up the Gothel Rapunzel combo later. Seriously, Hades is just so good. I'll never miss an opportunity to say that. They take down Rapunzel as expected and play out Emo Beast, one of their best cards. Now I execute my plan of retrieving Rapunzel and also add Simba to the mix, requiring them to commit 2 cards if they want to take down Mufasa. I do decide to ink Gothel though, as I'd rather hold Eudora and Maui in this matchup, and both will likely be able to offer Rapunzel that opportunity to heal damage anyways. My opponent decides to play defensively, drawing up cards and keeping their Prince Eric safe. I play out Tremaine, Quest, and pass. My opponent is still wary of taking down Mufasa here, which results in me getting to 13 lore. I have several options on this turn with Rapunzel, Eudora, and the different lines with Hades, but I decide to take down their beast with Maui. At this point, my opponent has to answer my pressure, and I assume their plan is to take down Tremaine and Mufasa with Tink, and banish whatever pops out with Eric and Hook. They instead take out Maui with that ping and challenge into Mufasa, who brings out Simba. Very thematic, but not all that effective. The end result of all that is a strong board from my opponent as they add Ursula to the mix. If they were any further ahead in lore, I definitely need to slam the Be Prepared here, but I do have some room to work with here, so I double Hades to set up my draw combo, and hopefully they add even more value to the board for my Be Prepared on the next turn. After all, many players don't expect the Mufasa list to be running that card. They play out some Maleficents, and I take down their board with Be Prepared. Now it's 4 cards in hand versus 4, and although I'm feeling good about how much card draw I can produce here, I know their deck only gets stronger over time. In fact, they're able to match my draw power, drawing 4 off 2 friends on the other side. Both of us are certainly gearing up for the final stretch. They play out Goat, and on my turn, I can wipe it out with Tremaine or draw cards off my combo as planned. With 10 ink, they can certainly bounce their way to victory, but I think I can race them with a strong board, so I play out Gothel and Rapunzel. This might be a critical mistake, as the safer play would have certainly been to take down that Goat immediately while I had the chance. They go to 14 lore now and threaten going to 17 on board, but they have a few ways to get up to 20. They can get there with 2 bounce cards and a Goat, or 1 bounce plus a spell book if they run that card. They can also shift in Tinkerbell and combine that with a Goat bounce, and even though they only have 3 cards in their hand, I have to consider all those threats. It's clear that I need to play out Tremaine now. Even taking off 1 single lore can mean the difference here. And now with Simba added, they need to find a way to respond to my own pressure. They certainly do find a way to respond though, shifting in Giant Tink and playing Grab Your Sword. This combo wipes my board clean, and you can see just how threatening their deck can become out of nowhere. I take out Goat and play out one of my 5-cost characters, inking Goofy to play out Mufasa, although Eudora would have been a pain for them as well. They empty their hand, setting up their board, and end by taking down Tremaine with strength of a raging fire, setting up lethal on the next turn. And now I have no other choice. After all that we've been through, Mufasa is my only hope here. I have to take down Tink and trust in the Circle of Life to bring me to victory. And we hit it, baby. As long as they don't find Goat or Spellbook, we should be good. And spoiler alert, they don't find it. What a photo finish this game was. I hope you all enjoyed that one. It was a very close match that definitely made Mufasa the star of the show. He put in more work in that game than I did, for sure. Now keep in mind, I've had some blowout matches in both directions in this matchup, but close nail biters like that are not only fun to watch, they're probably the most useful to learn from, as they showcase why the matchup is tough, and it shows what each deck can do when pushed back into a corner. And to wrap up this video, let's talk about the future of the Mufasa deck. So what comes next? Well, I'm still on the journey to perfect this deck. I think in its current state, it has some great answers into most popular decks, but there's always going to be room for improvement. I think it's in a really great spot right now, and I plan to play it a lot more over the next month leading up to Into the Inklands. If anyone wants to take this deck and continue to tweak it, feel free. It's up to you to take it from here. I think out of any of the cards that could be swapped out or tested, take a look at some of the 5 and 6 drop characters. There's a lot of flexibility here depending on how the meta shifts. Dropping some down to 2 or 3 copies in order to test new picks could be a good place to start. But in regards to the future of this deck in the meta, one fun bonus about this list and its focus on playing only characters is that Mufasa might just be a great answer in regards to where the meta is beginning to shift. If you know, you know. But I'll save that for a future video. For now, I wish you all the best of luck with your testing and playing. Make sure to tune in for my next exciting video, and I'll see you then. Peace.